welcome everybody to tonight's event. This is pretty exciting. My name is Michael Fitzpatrick. I'm the president of Phi Sigma Tau, that's the Philosophy Honor Society here at Chico State, and we're one of the groups that are helping to organize tonight's event. And I know that a lot of you could be doing something else with your Wednesday evening, so we're very thankful to have all of you here. And we hope that you find this a very stimulating and interesting discussion. So tonight's topic is going to be a discussion on the relationship between science and religion. And it's our hope that we can talk about this in a manner that is open and enlightening while still remaining respectful and civil. And this is, if you've heard anything that's in the media today, you know that this is a very controversial subject, and so we're hoping to bring some light to it without losing friends in the process. So to help us with this, we've invited a panel of specialists to come here tonight. They represent a wide variety of fields and different disciplines, and they're going to be sharing with you kind of how they think about the relationship between science and religion. Some of them think that it's an antagonistic relationship. Some of them see it as more of a complementary relationship. Some might see it as they're just two different things. They have their own realms of knowledge, while others might see it as, no, they are necessarily entwined in aspects of culture. So we have a lot of diversity on this panel. That's what we were going for when we put them together. Now, we're going to have a break once they present their perspectives, and then we're going to come back and allow all of you to ask questions based on their presentation. So be thinking about questions as they're giving their different viewpoints. Now, the future of science and religion, which is what this was titled, largely depends on how we understand the relationship between science and religion. That's why this conversation is so important, and we hope that tonight's event will better inform us as to what that relationship is like. The thing with science and religion is that they impact every part of our lives. They impact our jobs, they impact our families, they impact the values that we hold, the technology that we create, the directions that we take as a culture. And especially when it comes to values, those values are going to impact the decisions that we make. And science and religion seem to have tremendous impact on the kinds of decisions that we make. So, it's our hope that tonight we can better think about what direction forward should we take when making decisions insofar as we consider science and religion as a part of our culture. So that's kind of to just give you the big picture of what tonight's event is about. Before we get started, I want to thank some of the people who helped make this possible. This is an event that's about 7 months in the making, so we're pretty excited to finally be here to completion. I first want to thank the PAC coordinators. They're in the back. You can't really see them right now, but they did a lot to put all this together. And I also want to thank the philosophy department for supporting us and this kind of vision that we had. I want to thank our cameraman who's in the back, Brian. He's from Peterson Pro Video. And if you're looking for a good cameraman, you can go to petersonprovideo.com. He's great. I also want to thank Ben Falk. He has his own business called Falk and Creative. He's our graphic designer, which put together the flyers you've probably seen strewn around the campus. And he has a website, falkandcreative.com, and I highly recommend him if you're looking for a good graphic designer. The other thing I want to do is tell you a little bit about the organizations that helped put tonight together. There's several of us that collaborated to make this possible. And there's two reasons for doing this. The first is obviously to give credit where it's due, but the second is if you find tonight's talk stimulating and you want to go further, you want to go deeper, all of these organizations in some way intersect with this kind of a conversation and have this with their own groups. So you might consider talking with some of these groups afterwards and seeing about their meetings and the events that they do. And to help with that, we have a table in the back that has brochures from all the different organizations that you can take one of those for more information. So I'm going to start with myself. As I said, I represent the philosophy club here at Chico State. And our goal is to provide opportunities for students to, and community members to engage in some of the deepest questions of human life. We provide forums for faculty presentations, for student presentations. We have roundtable discussions on topics, and we do things like tonight's event. To give an example of some of the things that we do, last week we had a speaker come in from Southern California who talked us through rethinking concepts of genocide. And it was really fascinating and stimulating. So it's just to give you a snapshot of the kinds of things that we do. We're bringing in a philosopher of language from Stanford this April, as well as a moral philosopher from UCLA. And if you'd like to know more about these, I recommend going to our website. It's chsuchico.edu/PST, or you can take one of our pamphlets in the back. Now I'm going to introduce Justin Barrett. He's the president of the Secular Student Alliance, and they were one of the groups that helped us out with this. So, Justin.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our discussion tonight will cover a topic that has been vigorously discussed throughout history. And this is without question a topic that is lively in the social sphere today. But tonight, we're not here to get heated or to debate anything. The positions that you hear tonight will cover a wide range of perceptions and beliefs. And some will be controversial to individuals, while others will be more relatable. But the view of the Secular Student Alliance is this is a chance for us to not increase more division, but rather to find common ground. There is a place for science, namely the progression of humanity, and there is a place for religion, namely spirituality. But this notion of spirituality need not to be limited to religion or faith in any god or gods. Atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other freethinkers can also find love, hope, and wonder in the world that we live in. Let us take this time to be open to these new ideas and to be accepting of people who hold a different position than yourselves. Thank you very much.
All right, our next group organization that helped us out is the Chico Skeptics, and I'm going to introduce their president, Harold Bays.
Thank you, Michael. I think a lot of you are already familiar with Chico Skeptics, but if you're not, we're a group of secular humanists, agnostics, atheists, freethinkers that get together socially to promote rational thinking and skepticism. We have a lot of fun activities. One of them is Chico Skeptics in the Pub, where we get together on the first and third Thursdays of the month and have interesting speakers and discuss issues. Our mission statement is, we believe in a physical universe operated by natural causes and understood through science and reason. Our mission is to promote humanistic ethics, secular government, and decision based on evidence. And as you might guess, we have a fairly clear position on tonight's topic. And to us, part of freedom of religion is freedom from religion. And of course, we have a strong stand on separation of church and state. Some of our activities, in addition to getting together at Chico Skeptics in the Pub, we're going to have a booth at the Thursday night market this year, and we're trying to organize around doing some pro-social community service activities to show that secular humanists also help to promote the public good.
All right, and our other organization that helped put together tonight's event is the Chico Triad, and the chair of their group is actually one of our panelists, so I'm going to have Greg Kutsona say a little bit about the Chico Triad.
Well, first of all, I'm excited to be here. It's a great event, and Michael, to you, kudos for putting this together. Puts a lot of work into action, so thank you for that. Let me just read you the mission of the Chico Triad. The full name is the Chico Triad on Philosophy, Theology, and Science, to explore the intersection of these three disciplines in the academy and to present our research to the public and to the church. So this organization was founded in 2005 I wrote a grant with an organization called the Meta-Nexus Institute to form a local society, which is exactly what we are. It's a group of local scholars, some at Chico State, some at Butte, some independent scholars in these fields. On my little sheet here, if you want one in the back, it lists that we have people spanning the disciplines of physics, chemistry, kinesiology, theology, psychology, religious studies, biology, and many, many more. So we bring these people together. We have a monthly meeting actually at my house with beverages of different sorts, depending on what's brought. And once a year we put on a conference that I hold over just down the street at Bidwell Presbyterian Church. So I just want to say that the Chico Triad loves this kind of event. This is exactly what we want to be about, is the free and open inquiry of the relationship between these disciplines of theology, philosophy, and science. So I'm thankful to be at this event and hope you enjoy it half as much as I'm already enjoying it.
All right. So that's all the groups that made this possible. And again, I want to say thanks to everyone who joined in with us on this. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And as I said before, the way this is going to go is each of the panelists is going to give a quick presentation to kind of outline their perspective on these issues. And while they're going, we ask that you be thinking about questions, reactions, thoughts that you're having. Write them down. You'll get a chance to ask or put your questions to the panel once once all the presentations are complete. Just some ground rules. We ask that there be no applause or comments during any of the presentations. Please wait till the end of each presentation for your moment of applause. Please make sure that your cell phones are off, as always. And if you go to the restroom during the event, please do so quietly. And lastly, I want to say that each of these panelists have put a lot of time into it. So really be respectful of their ideas, give them a lot of thought, and see what they have to teach us tonight. So with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Joel Zimbelman. Dr. Zimbelman is the Dean of the College of Humanities and Fine Arts and the former chair of the Religious Studies Department here at Chico State. He's a professor of religious studies. Joel has a bachelor's in biology from UC San Diego, a master's in theology from North American Baptist Seminary, and a PhD in religious studies from the University of Virginia. He is a member of the Chico Triad on Philosophy, Theology, and Science, and recently gave the presentation, Natural Selection and God's Providence, Must It Be One or the Other, at the 2010 Science and Religion Conference here in Chico. So I'd like you to welcome our moderator, Dr. Joel Zimbelman.
Thank you very much. We've got an awful lot to plow through this evening and some very interesting presentations ahead. I'd like to introduce, to start us off, my colleague from the philosophy department, Joe Wong. Joe is assistant professor of philosophy here at Chico State. He has a double BA in Psych and Soc from UC Irvine and a BA in philosophy from Cal State Fullerton. Did his PhD work in philosophy at UCLA. His areas of specialization are the history of philosophy, especially the early modern period and Descartes. He has taught courses on medieval, modern, and analytic philosophy, the philosophy of religion, and an honors course on the history and philosophy of the soul. So we'll start with Dr. Huang. Welcome.
Thanks, John. So, thanks for all coming out tonight. I know many of you guys are tired, as I am, so hopefully it's going to be an exciting one. I think it is. Okay, so the topic of this panel discussion is supposed to be the future of science and religion. But I will be assuming that at the forefront, in the minds of many people here, will be the popular conflict between science and religion. My aim now is not necessarily to argue for any particular side, but rather to achieve some clarity in case this conflict comes up during discussion. Some may trace the roots of the controversy to the early modern period when the rise of mechanistic natural philosophy began raising doubts about the role of final causes in the world. Whereas many of the scholastic Aristotelians during the medieval period saw natural changes teleologically many of the early moderns after them began supplanting parts of the dominant Christian Aristotelian worldview with a mathematical mechanical science, purging teleology from their system. Now, our word science comes from the Latin word scientia, which was used during both periods to refer to a unified, systematic body of knowledge that was rigorously established on certain principles. Scientia commonly included the soul, God, and teleology technically understood in terms of final causes directing efficient causes. For instance, René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, placed the existence of the cogito, or simply the immaterial mind or soul, and also God, at the foundation of his scientia, with all knowledge being part of a unified structure founded on both these things. It would not be inaccurate, then, to say that scientia is what today many would consider to be something like a philosophy. Now, the extent to which science today is a scientia is a matter open for debate. First, it's a question whether science is unified in the way that scientia was traditionally conceived. Second, scientia was not taken to be only about the physical world, but about the nature of reality. So it's something much broader. It's not obvious that it's central to science as we know it now, that reality just is physical reality. And I should say that when I'm talking about science, I'm sort of including I'm not just talking about the natural sciences, but I'm also including the social sciences as well. Now, if it is, let me back up a little bit. It's not obvious that it is central to science that reality just is physical reality. If it is, that certainly wouldn't entail that it is also central to scientia. Many may quite plausibly hold science to be scientia, and I don't want to dispute that here. I simply want to raise some questions in order to jog our thoughts on what we mean by science in the context of discussing science and religion. Sometimes in discussions where the two are taken to be in conflict, what we find being opposed to religion is something like a loose collection of related views. For now, I'm going to call these views naturalism. And sometimes naturalism is taken to be a kind of metaphysical thesis about what exists or what there is. And this goes sort of under the common name as physicalism. One way of putting this thesis, or metaphysical thesis, is that reality is nothing more than physical reality, and physical reality is exhausted by the concepts of, let's say, physics. Now, of course, this raises a question about what relation biology and chemistry and the social sciences actually bear to physics. At other times, naturalism is taken to be a kind of epistemic thesis, or a thesis about knowledge. You might think all knowledge about the world will be given by science. And it may also be expressed in terms of explanation. All that is real will be explained by science. Now, some naturalists may disagree with the way I formulate these theses, but I think that most naturalists would agree that the natural world exhausts all of reality, and hence that there is no supernatural reality. Aside from the issues of delineating the real, the natural, and the supernatural, we can see how naturalism would conflict with religion. However, it is an open question, I think, whether naturalism is central to science. It does not seem that science entails naturalism, certainly not in any a priori manner. There may, however, be an a posteriori connection between science and naturalism. But what that connection is, I take it, is up for debate. To some, it's not obvious that a rejection of naturalism is a rejection of science. Hence, we should be careful about taking any tension between naturalism and religion as necessarily being the same thing as a tension between science and religion. Now, it is equally important to get clear on what is meant by religion. In discussing the conflict between science and religion, I think this is equally important. Just as it's important to get clear on science, we need to get clear exactly what we mean by religion. Now, some religious groups have been the center of much controversy for attempting to challenge professional mainstream science, most notably on the topic of creationism and evolution. Note here that creationism is not the minimal view that God created the world, but it's supposed to be a much more robust thesis than that. So I take it that everybody has heard of, or at least is familiar with this kind of controversy. It's kind of like the sexy controversy when it comes to this topic. So that's why I'm kind of focusing on that. Now, in this controversy, a particular religious group offers a competing theory about the origin of human beings, in particular and in general of life, based on a certain kind of reading of some specified religious text. I think this is a clear case of conflict with science. But I think we need to be careful once again about taking this to be a case of religion conflicting with science. In other words, it's not clear whether the particular thesis of a religious science or the particular hermeneutical approach adopted by a religious science are somehow essential to that particular kind of religion or religion in general. Unlike science, this group clearly presupposes a certain kind of metaphysic, and in this way it strikes me as being more like a scientia. If this is right, then the methodology or the religious foundation of that scientia is legitimately open to philosophical and scientific scrutiny. At least that's what I think. But one thing to note is the following. If the religious science is a genuine science, one should expect that the science will be, in some sense, fallible. So the idea is that if you have a religious science and it's supposed to be a genuine competitor of the mainstream science, right, you would expect some sort of fallibility in that, in the following sense, in that at least the propositions, there's a sense in which you can see how the propositions of that religious science might be confuted by contrary evidence or something. Should that not hold, I think we may, in the least, have good reason to think it's a quite queer science, right? Maybe you might not even say it's a science. So with that said, I just want to sort of set the stage and make sure that we're kind of clear about exactly what we're talking about, because I think it might be easy to kind of muddle these kinds of concepts. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sarah Pike. Sarah is Professor of Religious Studies and Director of the Humanities Center here at Chico State. Her BA is from Duke, and she did her MA and PhD at Indiana University in Anthropology and Religion. She teaches courses on American religions, world religions, and religion and animals. Her research focuses on alternative religions and new religious movements. She's published 2 books on contemporary paganism and the New Age movement, and has recently published articles on rites for mourning the dead, the Burning Man Festival, radical environmentalism, and religious youth cultures. Dr. Sarah Pike.
All right, I'm going to move this down a little bit. So I'd like to begin with a few comments about the academic study of religion. A religious studies approach to our topic of religion and science assumes that religion is a social and cultural phenomenon that is embedded in human political, social, and cultural life. Religious studies scholars assume there's a difference between devotional beliefs and practices and the study of religion from an academic frame of reference. Our aim as scholars is to deepen understanding about religious diversity and the ways in which religions shape and are shaped by political, economic, and cultural life. I'm interested in what historical and cultural factors have shaped the relationship between religion and science in different places and in different time periods. For example, I'd like to ask what is the meaning of the recent emergence of highly publicized and sensationalized polemics from the new atheists on the one hand and fundamentalist believers on the other? What contested issues emerge from these debates? Why are they important now at this historical moment in American public discourse? My own research over the past 20 years has focused on a variety of new and alternative religious movements, including contemporary pagans, such as modern-day witches and druids. Surprisingly, my first encounters with pagans when I began my research in the early 1990s was on the internet. Many of them were computer programmers or involved in other technology fields, and yet their religious practice focused on ritual and magic. They experienced little conflict between their science backgrounds and their religious identity. So I became interested in the relationship between magic, religion, and science historically, how these categories were constructed against each other, though the boundaries between them were often fluid. And like Joe, I'm going to go back to the early modern period. Religion and science are dynamic categories that shift and change over time and place. Western science took shape in Europe in the midst of a wide range of activities that characterized the investigation of nature in the early modern period. These activities included astrology, alchemy, and magic. Under close scrutiny, many such practices are difficult to reconcile with modern definitions of science. In 17th century Europe and colonial America, highly educated men and women believed that witches flew to sabbaths on broomsticks and the backs of goats, had sex with the devil, and cooked and ate infant body parts. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, European scientific elites studied magic, alchemy, astrology, divination, and demonology. For example, John Dee, a mathematician and expert in astronomy and navigation, as well as a consultant to Queen Elizabeth I, was also an astrologer and interested in angels. Isaac Newton, a somewhat later example, saw no firm barrier between theology and science, was interested in alchemy, the Bible, and church history. Newton spent years trying to perfect alchemy and conjure angels, even while revolutionizing the laws of physics. The so-called scientific revolution included many contradictions from a contemporary perspective, although they were not necessarily experienced as contradictions then. For instance, practitioners of 16th and 17th century science often reconciled religious faith and the investigation of nature. Boundaries between science and religion were constantly being negotiated, constructed, and reconstructed. Here in America, early New England Puritans investigated the natural and spiritual worlds simultaneously. 17th century Puritans were fascinated by the lore of wonders, and wonder books were extremely popular at all levels of society. Puritans cataloged phenomena like comets, rainbows, thunderstorms, witchcraft, and possession, giving all of them religious meaning. The categories of religion and science emerged in the 16th and 17th centuries at the same time that European colonialism was encountering primitive, in quotes, beliefs and practices in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. These encounters resulted in the construction of an evolutionary paradigm in which primitive magic was assumed to evolve into religion, which would then eventually give way to science. This view spread in the 19th century and is still with us today, even though it is a direct result of European colonialism and Western ethnocentrism. The equation of primitive magic with indigenous people and more civilized religion and science with the culture of the colonizers is, of course, problematic for a number of reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. So I want to switch to another set of issues. That was my first sort of main comment on doing religious studies and the categories of religion, science, and magic. Philosopher Stephen Asmer, writing in the Chronicle of Higher Education earlier this year, called the four horsemen of atheism, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, provincial, for not getting out in the world to experience a range of religious arenas. Asman had lived in Southeast Asia, where he observed multiple religious practices, such as Buddhism and animism. The four horsemen tend to attack the morals and ethics of religion, when animists, for instance, are more interested in issues of basic existence, such as protection of spirits, good luck, health, and food. Debates about science and religion tend to be framed in ways that privilege only one of the many forms of religiosity worldwide. When the media and general public discuss science and religion, religion is often assumed to be a normative Protestant Christian form. But what about non-monotheistic religions like Buddhism or animism, probably the world's largest religion? Moreover, in most of the current debates, religious belief is privileged over religious practices. Attention is focused on doctrines, dogma, and texts, instead of healing rituals, sacrifices, devotional offerings, and a multitude of other daily religious practices. So finally, what happens if we shift the topic to science and religions? Does a Hindu computer scientist who believes that the Ganges River is a goddess and bathes in her to cure illnesses of the body and soul view the relationship between science and religion differently than a conservative evangelical Protestant? Or a monk shaman performing performing a soul-calling ceremony in an intensive care unit of an American hospital. When we approach religion in its many forms, I think the debates become much more complicated and the boundaries between science and religion much more fluid. Social theorist Bruno Latour's studies of science challenge the distinction between religious beliefs and scientific facts in several ways. For instance, Latour argues that it's science that reaches to the invisible world of the microscopic or distant universes, and religion that is local, visible, and unmiraculous. Latour proposes the term factish to include both animist attitudes towards spirits or fetishes and laboratory researchers' attitudes towards facts. How do the categories of science and religion work for us today in contemporary America? It seems to me that 500 years after the early modern period where I began, religion, magic, and science have once again become blurred categories, as many contemporary Americans reject the notion of progress and no longer turn to science as holding all the answers. By most accounts, the U.S. continues to be a nation in which people turn to religious worldviews, including animism. Ancient beliefs in astrology, angels, divination, and a host of other magical practices are common in the U.S. today. Americans adopt multiple orientations to the world and its problems, including magic, science, technology, and religion, to help them cope with suffering, death, and uncertainty, and to help them understand the nature of the world around them and their place in it, just as people did in 17th century Europe and colonial New England. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Our next presenter is Chris Nichols, Associate Professor of Chemistry here at Cal State Chico. Chris has a BS in Chemistry from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and a PhD in Organic Chem from UCLA. Chris has thought extensively about the question of science and religion and has been involved in debates on this topic in the past. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Good evening, my name is Christopher Nichols. I am a scientist. I'm an organic chemist by training, and I'm also a card-carrying member of American Atheists. Tonight I want to share with you some of my statistics I found on the relationship between scientists and their religious beliefs, explore an imaginary what-if question on a real scientific controversy, and then I'll just finish by bluntly giving you my opinion on all of these topics. So, the Pew Research Center in 2009 did a study of the religious belief in the United States, so I'm going to focus on the United States, of both the general public and scientists, practicing scientists. And it turns out, in the general public, 83% of them believe in capital G, God. I can't believe it's 20 minutes into this, we haven't heard his name yet. And another 12% don't believe in God per se, but do believe in a universal spirit or a higher power. So that's 95% of American adults say yes to the answer of, do you have any religious beliefs? And only 4% say no, they don't believe in either in God or in any higher power, with 1% not participating in the survey. When you ask the same question, the same multiple choice question, scientists, around half have a religious belief. 33% in capital G God, 18% in a higher power, and 41% in neither of those things. So there's a huge contrast, 4% versus 40% in non-religious beliefs among scientists compared to the general public. And I asked myself why. Now, I don't have the answer to this question, but I do have a little bit more data that made me think of some possible answers to this issue. This is a graph by the same research company on the difference in religious belief among scientists based on their age. So one thing I want to point out that is even beginning scientists, age 18 to 34, you add up their belief in God or in a higher power, it's about 66% or 2/3. That is still substantially lower than the 95% of American adults in general who have a religious belief. So there's some self-selection going on. For whatever reason, a larger proportion of non-religious people are choosing scientific careers relative to the general public. And as you notice, as the scientists get older and older and older, their religious belief actually diminishes down to about 46% overall for senior citizen scientists. And that, in fact, is exactly the opposite direction, based on what statistics I've seen, that religious belief goes in the public at large. They actually get more and more and more religious as they get older. So somehow in the realm of science, there is some reinforcement. If you start off as a scientist, there's a higher percentage that you're going to lose your religious beliefs as you progress in science even further. Another interesting difference in the religious belief of different scientists is by their sub-disciplines. So I'm a chemist, and if you notice here in chemistry, we actually have the highest percentage of belief in God, 41% relative to 33% for scientists at large, and a grand total of 55% who say yes to believe in either God or a higher power. That's a little bit more than biology, is around 51%, right about the average. Geosciences is around the average. Physics is actually lower. Why might that be? Perhaps it is that chemistry, just by the nature of the experiments that chemists do, has very little in conflict with the sort of main religious beliefs held here in the United States. For instance, in biology you might encounter issues with belief in evolution, in geosciences perhaps the age of the earth, in physics perhaps the Big Bang Theory and things like that. Chemistry doesn't interrelate with those aspects as quite as directly as the other scientists do. In fact, there are publishing companies like Apologia Science that write textbooks primarily for homeschooled, fundamentalist Christian children here in the United States. And there's a whole series of books called Exploring Creation with blank. So this was one of the tables of contents from Exploring Creation with Chemistry. And this may be kind of hard to read, but if you look at their table of contents, there's almost no difference between a creationist chemistry textbook and a normal, regular chemistry textbook that I would use here at college or that you use in high school. The same, no one has any issues with atomic structure based on their religious beliefs. And Professor Weil here has a PhD in nuclear chemistry, so he knows what he's talking about when it comes to chemistry. The textbook that the same company publishes with biology has one module, this one about evolution, where they slam science. Why do so many scientists believe in macroevolution? And there's evidence against macroevolution. So there's a substantial difference here in the biology textbook compared to the chemistry textbook. I'll tell you a little story. So one of my functions in the chemistry department is I am the advisor for future high school chemistry teachers. If you want to be a high school chemistry teacher, come and see me after this seminar. So one day, 4 or 5 years ago, I get a phone call from a woman who just finished her bachelor's degree in biology here at Chico State, and she was about to enter the teacher credentialing program to be a high school biology teacher. And she called me because she just took the CSET exam. It's a qualification exam for future biology teachers, and it has questions about all the different topics you're obliged to teach from all the California biology standards. And she said that she hadn't realized until she took this exam what a large focus there was in the content standards for California students on evolution. And she couldn't teach evolution because it, quote, went against her morals and ethics. And she was really asking me for advice on how she could switch gears and become a high school chemistry teacher, where I presume she wouldn't have to deal with evolution on a daily basis. So some people, if you're in the biblical literalist community, maybe you'll be proud of her because she refused to compromise her, quote, morals and ethics and teach evolution to high school children because she clearly believed it was wrong. But I'm a scientist and I'm an educator, and that kind of made me sad because she had taken 4 years worth of biology courses here at Chico State, including studying evolution in a variety of courses, and one full course focusing entirely on evolution, and yet her mind remained closed to this scientific idea because of her religious upbringing. So I want you to imagine that we're going to talk about a scientific controversy in chemistry that really existed in the 1800s. So this is a South African gold coin, a Krugerrand, okay? And you can take it with a saw and cut it in half, and cut that in half, and in half again. So 2,500 years ago, in ancient Greece, the debate was, can you keep going forever? Plato and Aristotle said, you can keep cutting them forever. You'll always get smaller and smaller pieces of gold. But Democritus thought that matter was particular. And eventually you end up with one particle of gold called an atom. And the debate in chemistry was pretty much settled. It was proposed in 1800 that the atomic theory was correct and settled about 100 years later. And right now, there is no controversy. There are no chemical continuitists, whatever you might call it, out there. We're all atomists. But just imagine that someone found a lost scroll from Genesis 1:9. And God said, let there be minerals and gems and gold upon the earth deep below the ground. And it was so. And God said, let some gold deposits be large and others small, but no matter how finely divided, gold will still be gold. And it was so. Do you suppose that at this stage, if they read this in a sacred text, there would be a large segment of our population that doesn't believe in the atomic theory despite the evidence? Would there still be a controversy? Would a chemistry teacher like me be admonished for not teaching the controversy? You tell me. As a matter of fact, the Quran actually does mention atoms, but in a metaphorical sense. You know, if you do an atom's worth of good, meaning a very, very small amount of good. Anyway, so that's my statement. Here are my opinions. Basically, based on the kind of absurd example I just gave you, in my opinion, reading sacred texts, prayer, revelation, etc., those are inappropriate ways to find answers to questions about the natural world, about nature. Science is the appropriate method to find such questions. Now, maybe you say there are questions that you can classify as scientific or religious, but I don't think we're ever going to achieve consensus on where the dividing line might be. But science, that's a false dichotomy. There are lots of questions. Is adultery wrong? You may have your own opinion on that. In my opinion, that's not a scientific question. But it doesn't have to be a religious question either. It may be a question of morals, or it may be a question of culture, it may be a question of other things. And the reason I'm concerned about this is because the ramifications of religious-based decision-making on science can be huge. And of course, my best example is the impact of President Bush's decision, in my opinion, a religiously based decision, to ban presidential funding for human embryonic stem cell research on all but the old stem cell lines. Couldn't use any federal money to do research on newly developed stem cell lines. Okay, and I talked to a colleague of mine who works in a biology department, and they had both federal funding and non-federal funding, and did research on all different kinds of stem cells, but they had to be very, very cautious. If they bought a spatula using federal money, it had to be labeled as such, because if you use that spatula to scoop up the wrong stem cells, you're in violation of federal law. So that's a kind of a little bit of an absurdity of what happens, in my opinion, when religious beliefs interfere or are involved with scientific decision making. And I'd like to hear what some of you guys have to think. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Larry Herringer is our next speaker. He's professor of psychology here at Chico State and coordinator of the MA program in psychological science. Larry has a PhD in social and personality psych from UC Riverside. He teaches classes in statistics, research methods, and personality psychology, and has taught a capstone seminar on psychology and spiritual issues. His recent studies have been on gratitude, and he has presented on the intersection of psychology and religion for the past 3 years at the Chico Triad of Science and Religion Conference here in Chico. Dr. Larry Herringer.
Thank you, Joel. I wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight. There are a lot of things you could have done with this Wednesday evening. If you are a religious person, it's the beginning of Lent. If you're not, it's close to spring break. Either way, if you're religious or not, it's close to spring break. Anyway, I do appreciate it. We all do appreciate you being here tonight. We really do. And I want to thank also all the people that organized this, because it took a lot of organization. Well, I'm not sure I do this right. I knew, unfortunately, I was going to have to follow Chris Nichols. I met him for the first time 2 weeks ago, and I thought, great person to sit by, but terrible person to have to follow. Too enthusiastic, too engaging. I'll do my best. I'm going to talk fast, and I apologize for that. I want to talk from a standpoint of psychology, and in psychology we do make a distinction between religion and spirituality. A lot of times people talk about something that's related to spirituality or something that's related to religion. They use the words interchangeably, at least from a psychological standpoint. We're not talking about the same thing. Religion, when psychologists talk about religion and religion as something that's sort of important to people's life psychologically, primarily for us refers to organized beliefs and group practices. It's communal, it's social, often within a historical tradition, maybe denominational in this country. Much of the religion that goes on is denominational, but not all of it. But generally, religion is referring to these, some people will say dogma, other people will use another word, but they're referring to something that is more a shared belief system, practices, communal. Spirituality, usually from a psychological standpoint, refers to your subjective emotional experience, transcendence, your own spiritual experience, experience of a broader sense of reality than just the physical, everyday transactions that you have with people. It's seen as individual, experiential, and affective, meaning feeling-oriented rather than cognition, thought-oriented. Those two things I want to distinguish, but I think they come together for the sake of mentioning this. When people talk about, when someone says, I'm religious and I have a personal religious faith, or I have a personal faith, my faith, I don't see them as separate. I see them as coming together in someone's faith. Your religious faith might be your personal beliefs that are informed by a community, a faith community, a tradition that you belong to. It doesn't have to be in church. Wow, what happened there? Integration of beliefs, emotions, intentions, and practices, all of it together. So an integration of spirituality and religion. Okay, it's going to be an interesting presentation. I'm really sorry. Honest to gosh, didn't look like this on my computer. So I have two things I want to talk about with regard to spirituality and two things I want to talk about with regard to religion that touch on psychology. So the first is research in neuroscience and spirituality. Some of you may be aware of, done by Dr. Andrew Newberg. And in 2002, he wrote a book called Why God Won't Go Away. Certainly at that time, I think he probably has moved more toward the center, but at that time he would not have considered himself any kind of a religious believer. The point of his book, and I'm using that as a point to talk about his work, there's Dr. Newberg. Most of the work that he did, and he's written numerous books since then, that's just the one that has the title, I think, that is appropriate to think about his work, is he used functional magnetic resonance imaging scans. So looking at people's brains, basically looking at the metabolic activity of people's brains when they were engaged in various tasks. The things that he was looking at was when people were engaged in deep prayer or meditation. These things are not as easy to read as you might think when you look at it, but you're supposed to see that there's less red in the superior parietal lobe on the prayer scan rather than the baseline scan, and that means less metabolic activity. So to sort of summarize Dr. Newberg's findings, looking at Buddhist meditation or centering prayer, oh gosh, I apologize. He finds that the reports of that, first of all, as you might expect, are that those states that people experience are real. They're not dreamlike or hallucinatory. In fact, Dr. Newberg said in his book and numerous times that the thing that struck him was people reported them being as real as anything and more real than reality, but not like a dream, not like a hallucination, not like something different. Gosh, this is terrible. I really am sorry. You can see it, okay? Okay, honest to gosh, it didn't look this way on the computer. People feel connected to a deeper sense of reality. The parietal lobe activity is suppressed. And from a neuroscience standpoint, the parietal lobe does a lot of things other than just this. The brain isn't that simple that this big spot here does this and this spot does that. It turns down your spatial location of self so that your ability to locate yourself spatially is lessened. Dr. Newberg says spiritual experiences are brain experiences, and they're natural brain experiences. They're not unusual things. He wasn't studying epileptic seizures or something like that. Shifting gears, evolutionary psychology and religion. Justin Barrett, cognitive anthropologist at Oxford University in Great Britain. There's Dr. Barrett. Wrote a book in 2004 and has done work since then. The title was Why Would Anyone Believe in God? And what Dr. Barrett was looking at was what are the cognitive mechanisms that we might have, human beings might have, that would make it easy or natural that we would believe in God or be willing to believe in God. Starting with the fact that our minds automatically ask why. We look for a cause. We have non-conscious intuitive mental tools to do things like categorize, detect agency, detect patterns, order. Dr. Barrett says, belief in God is as mentally natural as believing that other people have minds, an almost inevitable consequence of the minds we have. In other words, the cognitive architecture. The third thing I want to talk about is meaning in life. Roy Baumeister, a fairly eminent social and personality psychologist at Florida State University, studied this back in the early 2000s and has done numerous other things sort of along the line of social and cultural life from a psychological standpoint. And Dr. Baumeister talks about 4 needs for meaning that his research suggests that human beings have. Purpose, cultural value or justification. You want to feel good or right in your cultural surround. Personal efficacy, a sense of competence, and self-worth. He points out that all religions satisfy the first two, at least. I would contend that most of them satisfy three or all four, but he says certainly the first two at least. And so, what Dr. Baumeister is saying is that it wouldn't be surprising that religion would be something that would be a very, very important human enterprise, because it certainly does satisfy the need for meaning in life. The last, I think, thing that I'm going to talk about is spirituality and positive emotions: love, hope, forgiveness, gratitude. These are some examples. And George Valent, a psychologist at Harvard, 2008, in a book, basically said that he believes that these positive emotions are integral in what we human beings are experiencing as spirituality. That they bind us to other human beings in our experience of God. Dr. Robert Emmons from UC Davis, who was our University Distinguished Visiting Professor a year ago, talked about gratitude and how much it matters, that it reflects a deeply entrenched human need, the need to give thanks. And that these things are very natural for human beings, these positive emotions. They're very positive for society, they're natural for us, and they go hand in hand with spirituality. I want to end with three points of view, diverse points of view. Lee Kirkpatrick, an evolutionary psychologist in Virginia. The human brain evolved to perform particular functions that reflect solutions to adaptive problems entailing survival and or reproduction. We come equipped with specialized mechanisms that guide our everyday thinking about our natural and social worlds, which when applied overzealously, produce religion and related phenomena. A second point of view, Baumeister. Since religion supports the exercise of free will, by that he means self-control, initiative, planning, and ethical choice, while fulfilling the human need to belong, it may represent an increasingly vital component of cultural life. And then the final one, David Myers is a fairly eminent social psychologist. So at the end of the day, we are each free to choose. We can view the longing for God as a God-shaped vacuum meant to be filled, much as a baby's hunger foretells the reality of food. Or we can view the human yen to perceive an invisible agency as an adaptive illusion. Thank you.
Folks in the back who'd like to come and grab a seat, this would be a very opportune time to do that. While I introduce our next speaker, Elizabeth Renfro, who says she just retired, but I don't know that she'll ever retire. This past spring as a professor emerita of multicultural and gender studies after teaching at Chico State for 35 years. She has a BA and an MA in English from Chico State, and her area of emphasis has been on how cultural institutions, such as science and religion, affect and are affected by our understandings of race, class, gender, and sexuality. She has taught courses in feminist theory, multicultural literature, queer studies, and gender and science. Elizabeth Renfro.
Thank you. I find the microphone rather off-putting, so wave at me if you can't hear me. I'd rather just yell. I want to take an approach of looking at common fallacies that people believe about science and religion. What we do in the field of multicultural and gender studies is look at the ways in which our cultural institutions, which include science and religion, incidentally, affect each other as well as affecting us. So web of interaction sort of thing. However, first common fallacy about science and religion is what I call the vinaigrette fallacy. And that's the notion that they are oil and water, that they don't mix, or you can shake them up like crazy and they'll work together for a while and they'll separate out, or you can add some kind of crazy chemical something or another to make them stay together, or even something natural like a raw egg, which will probably give you some disease. So they are oil and water, and they are confrontatory. What we need to do, everybody remember the Simpsons episode where Lisa found the petrified. So we've got the judge saying this is science versus religion. I'm issuing a restraining order. Religion must stay 500 yards from science at all times. In the field of multicultural and gender studies, our critically informed perspective would say that religion and science are not always in opposition. Often they are deeply interwoven, and some of the other panelists have mentioned this. Often mutually referential. That is, that they help to constitute one another. Certainly this has been true historically, and in my field we would argue that this still continues in many ways, for good and for ill.
They are also often in opposition, even while they are interwoven. So, for example, this isn't porn, I'll explain in a minute. Theologian Thomas Aquinas, one of the doctors of the church, big name, 13th century, was talking about this big argument. About 1,200 years earlier, they decided, yes, women had souls. However, they were still arguing about whether woman was a mistake, if God had made a mistake in creating woman, because everybody knew, as the capital philosopher, he's referring to Aristotle there, had stated and was believed up through 1700s, woman was a misbegotten man. In particular, Galen, a few hundred years after Aristotle, explained she was an undercooked man. Man, the perfect human being, had a great deal of heat, right, because heat was this highest element. So he was fully cooked, and one of the proofs of him being fully cooked, Galen asserted, was that his genitals had cooked all the way, kind of like bread rises, so they were external. However, and these, Aristotle, nice set of people. However, as in for hundreds of years, scientists. However, woman, because she was less hot, as it were, had less bodily heat, was uncooked. She was sort of doughy, and so her reproductive system and genitals never left the body. They were, and Galen specifically says, imagine a penis turned inside out. That forms the vagina, etc., etc. So this drawing here on the left is actually from 1600s of a woman's reproductive tract. Go figure. On the right from late 1600s, I believe it was, maybe early 1700s. Sperm with the perfect little human in it, because man was the one who could, of course, this is the science of the earth, man was the one who could create life. Woman was kind of the walking incubator, although she had raw material in there to feed the little puppy. This kind of stuff, these kinds of views, this interrelationship between science and religion. This is the vinaigrette that's been shaken up, but it's going to separate soon. We can see today, too. This is from today's Christian News. It's helpful that considerable biological evidence supports biblical differentiation. Even the April 2000 story in Time, New York Times, concluded from studies of testosterone that gender inequality in fields such as venture capitalism and politics is, and this is a quote from the article from the Science, gender inequality in those fields is primarily not a function of sexism, merely of common sense. Then it goes on, but what's most helpful is that God's word is clear. The Bible is colorblind, but gender conscious and right from the beginning. So we got science and religion working together, sort of. Second fallacy, the in the world but not of it fallacy. The eagle flying above. Philip Hefner, for years, was the editor of Saigon Journal of Religion and Science. Both scientists and theologians are known to argue that their pursuits transcend the circumstances in which they exist. Their societal captivity is frequently dismissed as conceptually irrelevant. Above the fray.